What if I told you history's most terrifying serial killer wasn't a man with an axe or a mask, but a countess who bathed in blood? She was called the Blood Countess, and by the time her reign ended, hundreds of girls were missing, never to be seen again. This is the true bone-chilling story of Elizabeth Báthory. Before we begin, I just want to say thank you. If you're watching this, whether you're one of my returning dark history explorers or you've just stumbled into this shadowy corner of YouTube, I'm glad you're here. This channel exists to uncover the buried, the grotesque, and the stories most would rather forget. If you're curious about the dark side of history, go ahead, like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, which disturbing historical figure should we expose next? Now let's go back to the 1500s, to a castle filled with screams. In the deep heart of 16th century Hungary, in a land steeped in war and legend, one name echoed through the hills: Bathory. They were not merely aristocrats, they were kingmakers, landowners, warriors drenched in the blood of countless battles against the Ottomans. And from this house of immense power and prestige came a child named Elizabeth, known to the world as Elizabeth Báthory. She was born in 1560 in the castle of near Bathory, an heiress not only to wealth, but to generations of brutality and high expectation. Her bloodline was laced with violence and cruelty. Her uncle was a warlord, her aunt reputed to be a witch. Even as a child, Elizabeth was taught to endure pain, to manipulate power, and above all, to survive in a world ruled by men. Her education was exceptional. She spoke Latin, German, and Greek. She read philosophy, but alongside tutors, she also witnessed punishments doled out to disobedient peasants, acts of violence that weren't just tolerated, but performed in front of her, as though they were lessons too. Some say her cruelty began in childhood, that she watched a servant girl beaten for spilling wine, that she once smiled as a man's hand was broken for theft. Others suggest these stories were spun later to justify the horror she would one day become. But one thing is certain: Elizabeth Báthory learned early that power was best maintained through fear. At 15, she was married to Ferenc Nadasdy, a soldier known as the Black Knight of Hungary for his legendary savagery on the battlefield. Their union combined two of Hungary's most powerful families, forming a noble empire built on blood, land, and war. But while Ferenc waged war against the Ottomans, Elizabeth ruled the vast estates alone. And in this vacuum of unchecked authority, something began to rot beneath the marble floors and velvet curtains of her fortress. Her story, still clouded by myth and medieval fear, is not merely one of nobility gone mad. It is the tale of a woman born into darkness, who may have chosen to become the very nightmare generations still whisper about. Čachtice Castle, nestled in the Carpathian Mountains of Slovakia, was no ordinary fortress. At first glance, it was regal, luxurious even. With its towering walls and pristine gardens, it looked every bit the estate of an aristocrat. But beyond the grand halls and marble chambers, something unholy was festering behind closed doors. Servants spoke in whispers. The maids, the kitchen staff, even the soldiers stationed within the grounds. They all knew something was wrong with the lady of the castle. By the early 1600s, Elizabeth's obsession with youth had taken a dark turn. Her once celebrated beauty began to fade, and with each wrinkle came panic. She believed that youth could be preserved, not through potions or prayers, but through blood. Virgin blood. Girls from the surrounding villages began arriving at the castle. At first, they were peasants, promised stable work, warm meals, or small wages. Families sent their daughters with hope, but many of those daughters never came home. Rumors spread like wildfire. The Countess was bathing in blood. Some said she drank it. Others claimed she cut her victims slowly, delighting in their screams. Her closest servants, terrified yet loyal, helped her procure the girls, clean the aftermath, and hide the bodies in castle walls, shallow pits, and cellars. One maid reportedly dropped a comb, and when Elizabeth struck her, blood spattered onto her hand. That spot, legend claims, appeared younger, more radiant. From that moment, the Countess began a quest not for beauty, but for eternal youth, regardless of how many had to die for it. Villagers began to vanish. Local priests grew suspicious. Yet none dared challenge a noblewoman with ties to the most powerful families in Hungary. Her cousin was the prime minister. Her wealth rivaled royalty. Who would accuse a Bathory? Behind the thick stone walls of Čachtice, the Blood Countess wove a reign of terror cloaked in satin, deception, and ritual. But as the missing grew too many, and the rumors too loud, justice started to stir from its slumber. The wind that wound through Čachtice's corridors no longer carried the scent of roses or bread from the kitchens. It carried something far colder, dread. The once proud estate had begun to rot from the inside, and those who lived within its walls knew it. They just didn't dare speak too loud. The servants, once eager to serve the Countess, now moved like ghosts, silent, pale, avoiding eye contact. Footsteps echoed a little too long at night. Doors creaked open in rooms where no one stood. And always, always there was the sound of weeping, muffled, distant, and never acknowledged. Some maids vanished overnight. The others simply folded the linens left behind and never asked where they'd gone. One guard posted near the old wine cellar claimed he saw blood pooling beneath a locked door. When he reported it, he was transferred to an outpost miles away. Another chambermaid confessed to hearing screams behind the castle chapel, screams that didn't sound human. She left the next morning with her belongings, never to be seen again. And yet, despite the darkness thickening in every hallway, Elizabeth carried on as if nothing had changed. In fact, she seemed more radiant than ever. Her skin glowed, her energy never waned, and her hunger for control intensified. She began hosting midnight gatherings, private rituals where only her most trusted aides were allowed. Candles lined the corridors leading to the western tower. Guests arrived cloaked, silent. None of the staff dared follow. The castle priest, Father Ambrosi, grew increasingly troubled. He sensed an evil not just lurking, but festering within these sacred halls. He tried to confront her once, gently, citing scripture, questioning the isolation, the absences, the odd rituals. Elizabeth smiled sweetly, placed her jeweled hand on his chest, and reminded him who paid for his vestments. He never spoke of it again. Still, the whispers grew. Some servants began writing to distant relatives, begging for rescue. Others tried to escape under the cover of darkness, only to be dragged back, bloody, broken, and reabsorbed into the castle's suffocating silence. It was no longer just a house of terror, it was a tomb for the living. And within it, Elizabeth Báthory thrived, her beauty deepening as the fear multiplied. Behind the thick walls of Čachtice, something monstrous was blooming in secret, and the walls were beginning to listen. Inside Čachtice Castle, the grotesque transformed into routine. What began as dark whispers now erupted into ritualized cruelty. Elizabeth Báthory's crimes were no longer chaotic moments of rage. They became carefully orchestrated performances. She selected victims with precision. Virgin peasant girls were still her favored prey, but now her appetite extended to daughters of minor nobles. Girls with names, status, families that could ask questions. Elizabeth believed she was no longer just preserving her youth. She was transcending mortality itself. She studied ancient texts, hosted clandestine meetings with occultists, and invoked mystical rites before each bloodletting. Victims were chained, not only for pain, but for ritual significance. Some were bled slowly, their blood collected in gilded bowls. Others were dismembered. Every act meant to unlock a secret path to immortality. Witnesses claimed Elizabeth kept journals detailing these rituals. In them, she scribbled twisted philosophies. Blood purifies. Pain awakens. Innocence feeds youth. Whether these journals existed or were fabricated later remains uncertain, but the sheer volume of corroborated testimony leaves little doubt. She believed she was chosen, and she was not alone. Her inner circle enabled her with quiet terror. Ilona Jo, her most loyal servant, reportedly oversaw many of the tortures. Dorothea Sentes, known as Dorka, helped dispose of bodies. Even a man named Fichko, mentally impaired but fiercely loyal, carried out some of her bloodiest commands. Together they formed a cult of cruelty, a court of blood. Inside the walls of Čachtice, they referred to her as Majesty or Mistress, and she ruled with iron grace. Anyone who disobeyed disappeared. The castle transformed into a theater of horror. Victims were hung upside down, their throats slit like livestock. Elizabeth would bathe in warm blood by candlelight, then recline in silence, watching the crimson drip down the stone. It wasn't madness, it was doctrine, a belief system built on vanity, fear, and power. Outside, the snow piled high in the Carpathians. Families still sent daughters, hopeful for work. And inside, Elizabeth prepared another bath, convinced that youth eternal was not only possible, but deserved. But with nobler girls now vanishing and rumors reaching the edges of the Hungarian court, her empire of blood was beginning to bleed out. And this time, someone would answer. In the bitter winter of 1610, the silence broke. Too many daughters of minor nobles had vanished. Too many whispers had turned into rumors. And those rumors finally reached the ears of King Matthias II of Hungary. Political connections had once shielded Elizabeth Báthory, but even royalty tires of scandal when it threatens the crown's reputation. The king tasked György Thurzó, the Palatine of Hungary and a relative of Elizabeth's late husband, with a discreet but decisive investigation. Thurzó, a man both devout and calculating, approached the task with precision. His first move, to gather sworn statements from villagers, servants, priests, anyone who had seen, heard, or buried anything. More than 300 testimonies were collected, graphic, specific, terrifying. Some spoke of hearing screams echoing through the castle at night. Others described seeing pale, mutilated bodies dumped in shallow graves or hidden within castle walls. One priest claimed he had refused to bless the home after seeing a girl's severed hand tossed into a fireplace. On December 29, 1610, Thurzó arrived at Čachtice Castle unannounced. What he found was not mere rumor, it was carnage. Reports say Elizabeth was caught in the act, standing over a dying girl. Others claimed bodies littered the basement, some freshly dead, others in varying states of decay. The castle reeked of blood and death. She was arrested immediately, but here, power intervened once more. As a noblewoman, Elizabeth could not legally be tried or executed without a full act of parliament. The king, facing pressure from Elizabeth's influential family, struck a compromise. Her accomplices would stand trial. She would be walled inside her own castle for the remainder of her life. Her servants, Ilona Jo, Dorka, and Fichko, were found guilty of murder and witchcraft. Some were executed by burning, others by beheading. Their loyalty bought them nothing but the swift justice of the sword. Elizabeth, meanwhile, was confined to a single room in Čachtice Castle. The windows were bricked shut. Food passed through a small opening. No contact, no light. Just 4 years of isolation, left alone with the echoes of the screams she caused. She died in August of 1614, found face down on the cold stone floor. No ceremony, no mourners, only dust and silence. The Blood Countess had finally bled out. Centuries have passed since Elizabeth Báthory died alone behind the bricked walls of her castle, yet her legend refuses to fade. Her name still echoes in the darkest corners of history, not as a hero of noble birth, but as a creature of nightmare. The world remembers her not for her titles, her wealth, or her influence, but for something far more enduring: fear. Some called her the Blood Countess. Others whispered that she was a vampire, a demon in silk. Her story gave rise to countless tales across Europe, of noble women who drank blood to preserve beauty, of castles that swallowed girls whole. Historians, folklorists, and horror writers alike found themselves drawn to the woman who allegedly killed over 600 young girls. And though the number may have been inflated, one truth remains. Something terrible happened at Čachtice Castle. Even in death, her image transformed. Some portrayed her as a misunderstood healer, a victim of political maneuvering by a patriarchal society eager to seize her lands. Others saw her as a proto-feminist gone mad with power in a world that denied women agency. But testimony doesn't lie easily. The sheer consistency among the 300-plus witnesses, servants, villagers, even nobles, makes denial hard to swallow. The wounds they described were real. The graves were real. The fear, palpable. Čachtice Castle still stands today, its ruins overlooking the Slovak countryside, like a hollowed-out skull watching time pass by. Tourists visit, some seeking history, others chasing ghosts. It's said that on quiet nights one can hear faint cries coming from the crumbled cellars below. Some even claim her spirit walks the ruins, forever searching for youth, for blood. In modern culture, Elizabeth has become an archetype. The seductive killer, the noble predator, the beautiful beast. She inspired novels, operas, films, even elements of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Her crimes were not only grotesque, they were theatrical, intimate, and unforgettable. But perhaps what haunts us most about Elizabeth Báthory isn't just what she did. It's what she represented. A woman with wealth, power, education, and privilege, who could have done good, could have left a legacy of strength and leadership, chose instead to become a monster. And monsters like her don't just die, they become legends. If this story chilled you to the bone, or made you question the line between myth and reality, you're not alone. History isn't just made of battles and kings. It's built on secrets, blood, and the horrors we try to forget. If you want more stories like this, true tales buried in time, wrapped in fear, and whispered through centuries, make sure to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss the next chapter. And tell me in the comments, do you think Elizabeth Báthory was a monster or a scapegoat buried by power? Let's talk about it. I read every comment. Thank you and see you in the next episode of Dark Lore.